Hello and welcome back to Bookish. It's Tag Tuesday, so I'm here with another tag. This is the All the Feels tag, which was created by Sarah over at Hardcover Hearts. I'll leave a link to her original tag video down below. If you haven't been to Sarah's channel, you should. She has a lovely channel, she's a lovely person, and this is an interesting and somewhat challenging tag for me. So, like many people, I'm going to be reading the prompts from my phone, so you'll forgive me for looking down, I hope. Prompt number 1, what is your instinctive physical expression of delight with a book? Well, this was hard for me because, I don't look in a mirror when I read, and no one's ever said anything to me about facial expressions when I read, but I will say that my posture, my reading posture changes the more engrossed in a book I am and the more I'm enjoying that book. When I'm really engrossed in a book, what I do is I kind of slide down in the chair or the recliner that I'm sitting in so that I can pull my legs up close to my face. I cross one leg over the other, and then I lean the back of the book against the calf of the leg that I've crossed over, so the book is really close to my face, and I probably frown in concentration regardless of how much I'm enjoying the book or not. As a matter of fact, I have a tendency, I frown in concentration at books that I enjoy the most. Prompt number 2, has there ever been a specific meal or food passage in a book that was memorable to you? There have been a lot. I think in another video I mentioned the eating contest in 100 Years of Solitude, but I'm going to go to kind of my oldest obsession in terms of reading, which were the Lord of the Rings books and The Hobbit. And if you know anything about those books, if you've read them, there are a lot of eating scenes. From The Hobbit, the scene where the dwarfs come to Bilbo's house to meet him for the first time, and they essentially raid and eat everything in his pantry. I loved kind of the litany of all the things that they ate. Also the lemnis bread, which the elves of Lothlorien give to the Company of the Ring to sustain them on their journey. I always wanted lemnis bread. I always wanted to know what it tasted like. It seemed like a remarkable thing. And then finally, also from the Lord of the Rings, I believe it's in the Return of the King, where Frodo and Sam are approaching the Black Gates of Mordor, and Sam manages, or sorry, I should say, Gollum manages to capture and kill 2 rabbits, and Sam very carefully makes a stew of whatever he can find in an attempt to sustain Frodo on their journey, because all they've been eating for some time was lemnis bread. Those are fairly memorable food or eating scenes for me, and the Lord of the Rings books and The Hobbit. Prompt number 3, what was the first most intense memory of seeing a scene or a passage from a book clearly? Okay, so this is a little unusual because my first memory of really understanding or seeing a scene or a passage from a book clearly is from a book whose name I don't know, or a book whose title I no longer know. At some point I checked out a book, which would be like one of those kid novels, which features in this case, a young man who is kind of on his own and having to overcome danger. And anyway, the young man goes out hunting, and he finds an old lean-to or an old shack in the woods, which he is automatically afraid of. And the description of that lean-to in the woods, and the gloom of the woods, and the dripping of the trees, and the humidity, and the cool, and the menace, and the kind of sinister feeling of finding that lean-to and wanting to explore it but feeling somewhat afraid to do so was really powerful. I grew up in East Texas, and me and my friends, since it was the 70s, we spent most of our free time in the woods just playing and making up things and exploring. And so I had been in the woods, and I had found things in the woods, in fact structures like that in the woods that had given me that sense of apprehension and somewhat that sense of fear. And so I could see that scene really clearly in my mind. And, even though I don't remember the title of the book, I remember that very vividly. Prompt number 4 was, what was the last time you slammed a book shut or threw a book out of rage, disgust, or frustration? I don't think I've ever thrown a book out of rage or disgust. I don't know that I've ever slammed one, but I have closed one let's say vigorously in frustration. The last one I think I did that with was Nightwood by Juna Barnes. And what frustrated me about that book wasn't that there weren't good stuff in it. It was just, it was so self-consciously modern that the author couldn't get out of the way of her own sometimes quite brilliant writing. Prompt number 5. Have you ever been startled by a passage in a book that wasn't a thriller, suspense, or horror book? And yes, just to name a few circumstances, or one or two. The short story Rose for Emily has a surprise in it. A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor has a surprise in it. I recently read Ohio by Stephen Markley, which had a number of surprises in it that I was not ready for. So yes, all the time. I don't think it has to be horror or a thriller to have that kind of shock or surprise value to it. Prompt 6. What was the last time you laughed? You laughed with the book. So what was the last time you laughed with the book? I don't remember the last time, but I remember one of the most memorable times, and that was in reading this book, Mason and Dixon by Thomas Pynchon. Now, you may not know it if you don't read Thomas Pynchon, and I know he's not always the most popular author on BookTube, but he has quite the sense of humor. And so in this book, Mason and Dixon, it's about the two surveyors who drew the Mason and Dixon line separating Maryland from Pennsylvania. And it basically has a lot of kind of fictionalized backstory from them. And in this case, Pynchon is telling the story of Mason's, how Mason met his wife. And he met his wife essentially at a cheese rolling, which took place in England. I believe that takes place in Cheddar, where they literally roll wheels of cheese down the hill. And so I've always thought this scene was funny, so I'm going to read it to you. As he'd learned later, the vicar had decided for reasons of safety to roll nothing greater than a double Gloucester down the hill. Yet, as if ordained by some invariance in the day's angular momentum, the drag shoe on one side of the octuple's wagon broke away, causing the conveyance to slew and slip down the side of a hummock, and at last tip over, launching the cheese into the air just before the wagon, its catapult, fell over with a great creak and jangle. Wheels a spin, as meanwhile the enormous cheese was hitting the slope perfectly vertical, bouncing once, startlingly orange against the green hillside, and beginning to roll, gathering speed. The first peripheral impression Mason had of it was, of course, a stargazer's, thinking, why? The moon isn't supposed to be out, nor full, nor quite this bright shade of yellow, nor for that matter to be growing in size this way. About then, smoking belatedly where he was and what was about to happen. Mercy! He threw his arms in front of his face and succumbed before the cylindrical onslaught with peculiar horror at having been singled out for misadventure. The victim of a cheese malevolent being his last thought before abrupt rescue by way of a stout shove preceded by an energetic rustling of taffeta. So I just love that, the idea of his last thought being victim of a cheese malevolent, and that scene's always kind of made me laugh. Prompt number 7, what book made you feel expansive? Well, that would be the Upanishads, or the Upanishads, which is a book of kind of Hindu wisdom and of a Hindu religious text, which contains just a lot of passages that frequently make me stop and think, reconsider myself, reconsider my actions. And so the Upanishads would be a book which makes me feel expansive because they have a tendency to help me reconnect with exactly who I am, where I am, and how big the universe is and how universal the human experience is. Let's see. So there are 2 bonuses. The first bonus prompt is to read us a passage that made you feel and tell us what you felt. And so the passage is from The Deerslayer by James Fenimore Cooper, somebody who I almost never see discussed on BookTube. So this is that passage. The spot was very lovely, of a truth, and it was then seen in one of its most favorable moments, the surface of the lake being as smooth as glass and as limpid as pure air, throwing back the mountains, clothed in dark pines along the whole of its eastern boundary, the points thrusting forward their trees even to nearly horizontal lines, while the bays were seen glittering through an occasional arch beneath, left by a vault fretted with branches and leaves. It was the air of deep repose, the solitudes that spoke of scenes and forests untouched by the hands of man, the reign of nature, in a word, that gave so much pure delight to one of his habits and turn of mind. I just like that description of Lake Glimmerglass from the Deerslayer, and that idea of being somewhere and in a moment of real natural beauty is something that really hits me right in the feels to go along with the tag. But this description of the natural beauty of this area, reminds me of those moments when I've been in nature and seen a beautiful scene or vista, and really just felt the power and the beauty and the wonder of nature. So the last bonus prompt was, what's a specific sense memory that a book evoked in you? I'm going to go to a book that I talked about earlier this year, and that is the Unvanquished by William Faulkner, which essentially tells the story of a family a Southern family during and after the Civil War. But at the beginning of the book, there's a scene where two boys are playing outside on a summer day, and they've drawn a map of the Battle of Vicksburg in the dirt with their fingers, and they're pouring water to make the Mississippi River through their map. And this is the exact same kind of thing that as a child I often did. And so I can kind of feel the dirt, and I can smell the mud it makes, and I can feel that kind of thrill of having created this little panorama of my own. And so that scene reminds me a tremendous amount of my childhood, and it evokes a real memory in me. Anyway, there you go. That's the All the Feels tag. Thank you again to Sarah for tagging me, and I look forward to seeing your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.